A friend of Harry's reportedly said something to biographer Tom Sykes back in spring that's actually worth sitting with for a second. If he doesn't get proper security, he'll go house hunting anyway. That's not the language of a man planning a quiet family visit. That's someone describing an ultimatum, delivered casually to a friend who happened to pass it along to a journalist.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, I really don't see Meghan actually taking her claws out of Harry unless she finds something bigger and better. And I'm not sure that she has the attributes to find something either bigger or better. Or quite frankly, I don't know. Even I don't think even my gardener would want to be tainted with an association with her.
Let's actually walk through what's apparently been unfolding behind the scenes here, because there's considerably more texture to this story than the headline version suggests. According to Sykes, reporting for The Royalist, Harry and Meghan were reportedly planning this move back to Britain for months. Not the sudden, emotional decision it's been publicly framed as, but something considerably more deliberate. 6 years after leaving, after the Netflix cameras, after calling his own family racist in interviews and memoirs, after insisting repeatedly that he and his wife couldn't safely live in Britain without police protection, Harry's own friend was reportedly telling Sykes something rather different this spring. That Harry had become fully determined to spend real time back home, security or no security. Picture the actual timeline here for a second, because it matters.
I don't think it's even a billionaire status that we're speaking about. Most men wouldn't want to have anything to do with Meghan. So I think she's stuck, and as long as she's stuck, he's stuck, because if she doesn't want to let go, unless he's going to somehow develop the backbone he's never had before, I think they're stuck together.
This wasn't a whisper that surfaced days before the official announcement. This was reportedly circulating among Harry's own circle back in spring, months before anyone outside that circle had any indication a move was coming. Whatever explanation eventually got offered publicly for why this decision happened when it did, the people closest to Harry apparently already knew the actual shape of his thinking long before the rest of the world caught up. The friend reportedly described security as still Harry's central grievance, but no longer something he was willing to let function as a veto over his entire life. If the establishment wouldn't hand him the protection he considers his right, according to this account, he'd simply force the issue, buy a house, move in, and effectively dare local police not to protect him.
But he's married his mother, let's remember. Oh, Maggie's so much like Mummy. So much like Mummy. Oh, I mean, give me a break. Yeah, I don't recall Diana having the hair of 30 Turkish virgins trailing down to her waist.
He apparently already had somewhere specific in mind, not London. The Cotswolds, rolling countryside close to his father's home at Highgrove, an area Harry reportedly knows with the kind of intimacy that only comes from actual lived history there. According to the friend's account, he drank in local pubs with William during easier years, reportedly including one where the brothers are said to have smoked together back when their relationship still allowed for that kind of easy fraternal mischief. He reportedly lost his virginity in a field behind another local pub. This is apparently, in every real sense, home turf for him. There's something worth actually picturing here beyond the individual facts. Somewhere out there, a specific pub still has a corner where two young princes reportedly sat together decades before any of the estrangement, the interviews, the lawsuits, the 6,000 miles of physical distance. That same landscape apparently remained, for Harry, a fixed point of genuine comfort, even while everything else about his relationship with Britain became publicly adversarial.
The Wall Street Journal published a piece that concluded by raising for the second time in a mainstream outlet, the first was Vanity Fair, the possibility that Harry and Meghan might divorce. The journal noted in an extraordinary aside that were Harry ever to remarry, he would first have to ask the King's consent. The friend dismissed the Wall Street Journal's implied notion when I raised it.
People rarely choose the geography of a genuine emotional retreat by accident. If Harry's specifically drawn back to this exact stretch of countryside rather than anywhere else in the country, that tells you something real about where his actual attachment sits, regardless of everything he's said publicly about Britain more broadly. The friend reportedly added a detail that actually stopped me when I first read it. Harry apparently intends to spend at least a month in the UK in 2027. timed around the Invictus Games launch, with an expectation, according to this account, that the king will open the games alongside him, a gesture that would send its own unmistakable message toward William. Either before or after that specific trip, the plan apparently involves actually purchasing a home here.
Meghan Markle were secretly planning to move to the UK for months with or without security. That, the bombshell claim from Tom Sykes of The Royalist, who has released a chapter of his new book, The Dukes, or The Dukes of Hazzard, coming about Prince Harry, Andrew Mountbatten Windsor, and the Duke of Windsor in the months to come.
Think about the specific symbolism being described in that plan, if it holds up. Not a quiet, private visit. A public appearance, timed to a major event Harry personally founded, with the king reportedly standing beside him in a moment that would be photographed, broadcast, and read by absolutely everyone watching as a statement about where father and son currently stand relative to William. If that's actually the plan, it's not simply about seeing family, it's about staging a specific image at a specific moment for a specific audience. And that audience apparently includes his own brother. Sykes reportedly asked the obvious follow-up. What about Meghan? Wouldn't London suit her considerably better than the Cotswolds? The friend's response was reportedly blunt. Harry apparently doesn't want London at all. Too crowded, too hectic. The countryside is where he wants to be. As for Meghan, according to this account, it's purely about business.
Then, of course, we come to your bombshell reporting, which is that Meghan found text messages on Prince Harry's phone, which suggested that he may be too close to another woman in Montecito. So I think we can definitely say that if the marriage had been happy, and of course there's a whole load of factors that go into that, betrayal, but also finances, then they wouldn't be on their way back.
If her lifestyle brand builds enough commercial traction in Britain, splitting time between locations might become practical. If it doesn't, there's reportedly little actual reason for her to be based anywhere but America. Read that specific exchange again slowly. Not London, because London doesn't fit his lifestyle. Business considerations for her, because her presence apparently depends on commercial viability, rather than any personal desire to actually live there. Two completely different logics governing where each of them ends up, running in parallel rather than together.
Yes, 6 years after leaving the United Kingdom, after selling his voluntary department to the Netflix cameras as a liberation, after denouncing his family as racist, after arguing in court and in his memoir, and in interviews that he and his wife could not safely live in Britain without police protection, Harry's pal was now saying that he was utterly determined to start spending lengthy periods of time back home.
That's not how people typically describe planning a shared home. That's how people describe managing two separate professional operations that happen to share a marriage certificate. Sykes reportedly pressed further. So Harry in the Cotswolds while Meghan's in California for weeks, possibly months at a stretch? The friend apparently just shrugged. No visible discomfort at all, as though this wasn't describing a marriage operating at considerable physical distance, but simply a practical solution to two people's competing professional demands. The very next day, the Wall Street Journal reportedly published a piece raising for the second time in a mainstream outlet after Vanity Fair had done so previously, the actual possibility of divorce.
The expectation is that it will actually be a documentary, Lady C, rather than a book, but we don't know. We don't know yet. But my belief is that these two projects are about money. That's what it's about. It's about money.
Of course it's about money. I mean, Charles Spencer has a very expensive estate and stately home to maintain. And he does whatever he needs to do, as does everybody else, to bring in the money.
The journal apparently noted, almost as an aside, that if Harry ever wanted to remarry, he'd formally need the king's consent first under existing constitutional convention. When Sykes reportedly raised that specific detail with the same friend afterward, it was apparently waved off entirely. Sit with that specific sequence of events for a moment, because it's actually striking laid out in order. A friend describes an arrangement that sounds, on its face, like a couple already living apart in practice. The very next day, a serious financial newspaper independently raises divorce as a real possibility for the second time in recent months, complete with a specific detail about royal consent that only makes sense to include if the writer honestly believed remarriage was a live possibility worth mentioning. Then, when confronted directly, the same friend simply dismisses the entire idea without offering any actual counter-explanation. That's not how you'd expect someone close to a properly stable marriage to respond to a serious, specific accusation. Now, here's where things get properly more complicated because there's a financial thread running underneath all of this that several commentators have connected directly to the marriage's apparent strain. The general argument goes something like this. When money's flowing freely, plenty of relationship friction simply gets absorbed. It's considerably easier to tolerate a difficult patch with a partner when there's real financial security cushioning everything. But once the money starts drying up and real pressure builds, cracks that were previously manageable tend to widen.
At some point, those two egotists are going to have to come to terms with the fact that being followed around by 8 outriders and 27 armed vehicles isn't going to make the public feel they're 1 millimeter more important than they are, because we know that they are of absolutely no importance whatsoever.
And it's worth remembering Harry's own words in court, describing what the ongoing legal battles had reportedly done to his wife specifically, that they'd made her life a misery in his own phrasing. That's not really the language of two people having the easiest time of their lives right now, whatever the carefully curated photographs and public statements might suggest to a casual observer scrolling past on social media. There's a specific claim that's circulated widely in commentary around this, that Meghan reportedly found text messages on Harry's phone suggesting he'd grown unusually close to another woman locally in Montecito. I want to flag that specific claim clearly as unverified speculation rather than confirmed fact. It's been repeated across multiple commentary sources, but nobody's produced the actual messages, named the specific person involved, or offered anything beyond secondhand characterization of what those messages supposedly said. Treat it exactly as that. A widely circulated claim, not established fact.
Now, Harry clearly has changed his mind on that, Lady C. I think it's pretty obvious that there is a financial motive in terms of him doing so. And I would say it's the same thing with Earl Spencer, because while I agree with you, of course we do want to hear what he's going to say, and I will absolutely be analysing it here. At the same time, his explanation as to why he's doing this, being all altruistic rather than about the money, doesn't really ring true to me.
Claims like this one tend to spread precisely because they're unfalsifiable in practice. Nobody can produce a screenshot that doesn't exist in any public record. Nobody can name a person who's never been publicly identified. And yet the story keeps circulating anyway, picking up new tellings each time because it slots neatly into a broader narrative that already feels plausible to plenty of people watching this couple's public trajectory. That doesn't make the underlying claim true. It also doesn't make it automatically false. It simply means the claim exists in a category where confirmation may never actually arrive either way, which is worth remembering every single time it gets repeated as though it were settled. What's harder to dispute is the broader financial picture underneath all of this.
As for Meghan, it was all about business. If, as ever, her lifestyle brand develops sufficient commercial traction in the United Kingdom, that might make it practical for her to divide time between locations. If it didn't, the friend acknowledged there was little practical reason for Meghan to be based anywhere other than the United States.
The original Netflix deal, whatever its actual final value, was reportedly never quite the 100 million headline figure that got repeated everywhere, though it was reportedly still a considerably substantial sum. Then came Spotify, a deal reportedly built around both of them jointly, which apparently struggled once it effectively became Meghan's project alone. Since then, Netflix output has reportedly narrowed considerably, down to a lifestyle series built heavily on themes of past victimhood and family estrangement. The very family they're now apparently rushing back toward. Follow that specific arc all the way through because it tells its own story without needing much additional commentary. A joint deal, structured around both of them together as a unit, becomes a solo project once one half of that partnership steps back. A lifestyle series meant to showcase an independent, self-made life outside royal structures ends up leaning heavily on the exact family drama that supposedly justified leaving in the first place.
He enjoys hiking and outdoor activities, the friend said, and is used to that pattern of life in California where he walks his dog on the beach or hikes in the canyons. The friend added further detail about Harry's plans that I found astonishing. They said he intends to spend at least a month in the United Kingdom in 2027 ahead of the launch of the Invictus Games, which he believes that the king will open alongside him, a gesture of paternal solidarity that would send its own unmistakable message to his brother, and either before or after that he would buy a new home here.
Each individual pivot might have a perfectly reasonable explanation attached to it. Stacked together in sequence, though, they describe a business model that's been quietly running out of new material for years, circling back to the same well repeatedly because nothing else has proven as commercially reliable. According to some of the sharper commentary on this, had the finances remained properly healthy, there'd have been far less actual motivation for Meghan specifically to return to Britain at all. But she reportedly can't easily separate from Harry right now because, according to this particular read, she's not generating comparable income independently. There's no other obvious wealthy partner reportedly waiting in the wings for her, and several commentators have argued she's become something close to stuck, professionally and personally, tied to Harry's specific situation, whether she'd prefer that or not.
If the establishment would not give him the security he considered his right, he would put it up to them. He would buy a house, move into it, and essentially dare the local police force not to protect him. He even had a location in mind, the Cotswolds, the rolling English countryside close to his father's honeystoned home of Highgrove, whereas former staff have told me Harry was happy as a teenager and young man.
Think through the actual logic being described here for a second, separate from the harsher language attached to it in some corners of commentary. It's suggesting a purely transactional read on the marriage's current state, that whatever emotional connection may or may not still exist, the practical glue holding things together right now is financial interdependence more than anything else. Neither party currently has a clean, obviously better alternative sitting available. That's a properly uncomfortable thing to say about any marriage, celebrity or otherwise, and it's worth being honest that this specific interpretation remains exactly that. One reading of an ambiguous situation, not a confirmed fact about either person's actual feelings or private calculations. I want to be properly careful here, because some of the language used around this specific point in various commentary has gotten fairly harsh and personal toward Meghan directly, framing her prospects and options in ways that reduce her to little more than her perceived market value to other wealthy men. I don't think that kind of framing is fair or particularly illuminating regardless of what you make of the marriage's actual state. Whatever tensions actually exist here, they deserve more serious treatment than reducing a real person to speculation about her supposed romantic marketability.
Let's remember, all the money that came in was basically as a result of Harry. Meghan may have cut the deals, but Harry's existence is the one that made the deals possible. So the Netflix deal was originally, and it was never, as you and I both know, $100 million. But the fact of the matter is, it was a nice, tidy sum. And so then you had Spotify. Everything, and Spotify was supposed to have been Harry and Meghan. And it failed miserably when it was just Meghan.
If this kind of layered breakdown interests you, the like button genuinely helps this channel keep digging into stories like this one, rather than settling for the surface version. There's also a specific theory circulating that Harry's UK return isn't unrelated to the security question at all, that it's actually a fairly calculated financial move. If he manages to establish UK residency, and Charles agrees to even a minor, informal royal role, that reportedly opens the door to state-funded security again, potentially saving something in the range of $3 million annually in private protection costs. Even working royals like Princess Anne, Prince Edward, and Sophie reportedly don't receive full round-the-clock security coverage. If Harry's expecting anything close to what he had previously, multiple commentators have suggested that's simply not realistic, even in the best-case scenario where some kind of minor royal role does eventually materialize. And several have been fairly direct that any actual return to formal royal duties looks extremely unlikely regardless.
I think they have no choice but to be on their way back, because the feds, they are aware of the fact that the feds might arrest Harry if he overtly remains an American resident. So I think their hand has been forced. I don't think that this is it's something that's totally elective.
But we know, ladies, I totally understand what you're saying, but we also know that Prince Harry has been really miserable for quite a long time.
Absolutely.
The most Harry could reasonably expect, according to this reading, is being tolerated at the margins of family life rather than actually welcomed back into any working capacity. Layer onto that the ongoing Sentebale legal situation, the case involving Sophie Chandauka that's been generating its own separate headlines, and you get what several commentators have described as something close to a perfect storm hitting simultaneously. Financial pressure, legal exposure, and a security question that doesn't have a clean resolution in any direction. Consider the actual timing overlap here because it's properly striking once you lay it out. A cost ruling that leaves Harry exposed to potentially tens of millions in legal fees. A separate charity lawsuit dragging on with no clear resolution date. A property that costs well over $1 million a year simply to maintain, whether anyone's actually living in it full-time or not. And a marriage that multiple independent sources, across multiple separate outlets, keep describing in increasingly strained terms. Any single one of those pressures would be properly difficult to manage in isolation. All four landing in roughly the same window suggests something closer to a household actively buckling under compounding weight, rather than simply navigating one difficult patch among otherwise smooth sailing.
But she needs to come back with Harry because she can't be separated from Harry because she's not making money on her own.
Totally.
And
as we've
she's
always
not-
said, there's no other billionaire lining up. You know, she is damaged goods in a whole load of ways. So she has to cling on. She has to swallow her pride. And this is a woman who, above anything else, is strategic.
There's also a fairly blunt financial argument about the actual Montecito property itself. According to detailed breakdowns circulating recently, simply maintaining that estate costs a properly significant amount annually, well before security expenses even enter the picture. Property taxes alone reportedly run around $152,000 yearly. Insurance reportedly ranges from $50,000 to $150,000. Landscaping alone can reportedly reach $150,000. Pool and spa maintenance, roughly $20,000. Housekeeping and property staff, potentially up to $200,000. Repairs and maintenance, a further $250,000. Utilities somewhere between $40,000 and $80,000. And the estimated mortgage itself, reportedly around $516,000 a year. Add all of that together and you're reportedly looking at something between $1 and $1.5 million annually just to maintain that specific property, and that figure doesn't include security costs at all. Broken down monthly, the property taxes alone reportedly work out to something close to $12,000 every single month. Given numbers like that, it's honestly not surprising that persistent rumors about an off-market sale keep resurfacing, or that Meghan's recent content has apparently leaned so heavily into showcasing renovated kitchen spaces and property updates, details that, fairly or not, have been read by some as quiet preparation for eventually listing the place. Look at what that kind of content strategy would actually accomplish if the sale theory holds any water. Renovation footage doubles as lifestyle content in the immediate term, generating engagement and reinforcing the brand's aesthetic. But it also functions, whether intentionally or not, as a form of pre-listing staging, the kind of polished, well-lit documentation that real estate agents typically commission right before a property goes to market. Whether that market appearance happens publicly or through the kind of quiet, off-market channel wealthy sellers often prefer specifically to avoid exactly this kind of public speculation. Now, running alongside all of this UK return coverage this week was a separate but oddly connected story. The announcement that Charles Spencer, Diana's brother, is finally writing his own book about his sister, timed around the 29th anniversary of her death. Several commentators have floated a fairly specific theory here, that this timing isn't coincidental at all, but effectively coordinated with Harry, clearing space for Spencer to capture attention and commercial opportunity around this particular anniversary, leaving the 30th anniversary next year clear for Harry to do something similar, something he's apparently been quietly planning for some time regardless. Picture how that specific timing sequence would actually work in practice if the coordination theory holds any real weight. Spencer gets the 29th anniversary to himself commercially, generating headlines, book sales, and renewed public attention on Diana's legacy without any competing Sussex-branded content diluting the spotlight. Then, exactly 1 year later, at the more symbolically significant 30th anniversary, Harry gets his own turn with an audience that's already been primed by a full year of renewed Diana-focused media attention. That's either a remarkably convenient sequence of independent decisions, or it's precisely the kind of staggered rollout a competent publicity team would design deliberately. There's also a reputational angle worth noting here too, one that's genuinely difficult to ignore once you think it through fully. If Diana's own brother is willing to commercially engage with her memory around a death anniversary, that arguably makes it somewhat easier, socially, for Harry to do the same thing next year without facing quite the same level of criticism he might have otherwise. Worth remembering, though, that by most accounts Diana herself wasn't particularly close to her brother by the time she died in 1997. They reportedly weren't speaking at all in her final months, a rift that apparently traces back to Spencer declining to let her have a specific cottage on the family estate, which she was reportedly deeply unhappy about. That specific estrangement matters for how you read this new book, because it complicates any simple framing of Spencer as the natural, obvious custodian of his sister's memory. Siblings who weren't speaking at the time of a death don't automatically become the most reliable narrators of that person's final years simply by virtue of shared blood and surname. Whatever Spencer writes about Diana's actual state of mind in 1997 will inevitably be reconstructed, at least partly, from a relationship that had already broken down by that point, which is worth keeping in mind regardless of how compellingly the book itself ends up being written. That said, Spencer is by most measures a properly accomplished historian and writer, and as Diana's actual brother, he has every reasonable claim to write about her life. Whether his specific account proves fair and accurate is a separate question entirely from whether he has standing to write it at all. There's a more pointed criticism circulating too, though, regarding how Spencer's previous public comments about their childhood have been received. He's reportedly been fairly critical of their own mother in public remarks, suggesting she wasn't particularly maternal in ways that some biographers and family friends have characterized as a genuine distortion of the actual history, pointing to two separate, protracted legal battles their mother reportedly fought trying to regain custody after an earlier separation. Battles she reportedly never actually won. That specific detail deserves proper unpacking rather than a passing mention. Losing custody entirely, twice fighting through the courts to reverse it, and still never succeeding describes a genuinely painful chapter that most people would find difficult to characterize fairly from any single angle, let alone from the perspective of a child who lived through it and later became a public commentator on his own mother's parenting. If Spencer's own account of that period has previously drawn this kind of pushback from people who knew the actual circumstances, it raises fair questions about how carefully and fairly he might handle other complicated chapters of Diana's own life in this new book. There's a broader thread here too, connecting back to a promise made nearly a decade ago. At the 20th anniversary of Diana's death, William reportedly pushed hard for a specific agreement between himself and Harry that this would be the last major public commemoration tied to an anniversary of her death, full stop. No repeat performances at the 30th, the 40th, or beyond. They reportedly followed through together at the time, each contributing to documentaries made with the BBC and ITV respectively, actually personal projects, and William apparently entered that specific commitment believing it was truly final. Think about how much has changed in the broader media landscape since that original agreement was actually made. 10 years ago, a formal documentary partnership with an established broadcaster was essentially the only real option available for a project of that scale and sensitivity. Today, either brother could theoretically produce something entirely independently. A streaming deal, a self-funded documentary, content built directly for platforms that didn't meaningfully exist in their current form back when that original promise was made. If Harry does eventually produce something for the 30th anniversary, the format itself will likely look nothing like what either brother agreed to a decade earlier, which raises its own separate question about whether the spirit of that original commitment can even meaningfully survive a landscape this different. If Harry now proceeds with something new for the 30th anniversary, whatever form that eventually takes, it would represent a fairly direct departure from that earlier shared commitment. One William apparently continues honoring in his own ongoing charitable work without needing any anniversary-timed media project to justify it. None of this individually proves anything catastrophic about where this marriage or this broader family situation actually stands. Financial pressure doesn't automatically mean divorce. A planned move doesn't automatically mean deception. A biography timed around an anniversary doesn't automatically mean coordination between two separate authors with entirely different motivations. Consider each thread on its own merit for a moment before assuming they all point in the same direction. Plenty of wealthy couples navigate genuine financial strain without it threatening the underlying relationship at all. Money problems reveal existing cracks more often than they create entirely new ones from nothing. Plenty of authors write about the same historical period independently, arriving at similar timing purely by coincidence rather than coordination, especially around an anniversary as significant and widely anticipated as this one. And a friend's second-hand account of someone's living arrangements, however detailed, remains exactly that. One person's characterization, filtered through a journalist's own framing, rather than a direct statement from either Harry or Meghan themselves about their actual intentions. But taken together, the reported house hunting months before any public announcement, the specific Cotswolds detail suggesting Harry and Meghan may increasingly live physically apart, the stark cost breakdown on Montecito, the security calculations, And now a Spencer memoir landing at a suspiciously convenient moment. The picture that emerges is one of considerable compounding pressure hitting multiple fronts simultaneously, with financial reality apparently driving decisions that get publicly framed in considerably warmer, more sentimental terms. What do you think? Does the Cotswolds detail specifically Harry wanting the countryside while Meghan's business considerations keep her largely in America suggest a marriage that's already functionally operating at real distance? Or is that reading far more into one friend's second-hand account than the evidence actually supports? And on the Spencer book timing, coordinated strategy between him and Harry, or two separate people reaching similar conclusions about capitalizing on the same anniversary independently? Let me know your honest take in the comments. And if breakdowns like this one are what you come here for, go ahead and subscribe to Palace Insider so you don't miss the next one.